I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
And I'm Kevin Moffett, and this is the Concavity Show.
This is episode 91. Kevin, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you, man. This is fantastic to have you.
Great to be here.
Cool. If folks haven't heard of Kevin Moffett before, I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm glad we can help correct that today. Kevin is the author of two short story collections, one called Further Interpretations of Real Life Events from 2011, and then Permanent Visitors from 2006. And then Kevin, also you did a narrative app with Eli Horowitz, who is like renowned on our show, huge McSweeney's editor. Like we've had Adam Levin on 3 times, for example, and he was his editor for a lot of his stuff. So that's really cool. I tried to download it, and I guess it's not functionally available anymore. Is that still the case?
Yes, one of the great joys of writing a sprawling narrative for mobile devices is that soon the map-making software is out of date, and so you have to pull it from the App Store, and that's what's happened.
Damn, I'm sorry I got to experience that. Seems very cool. Kevin also has an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop. He teaches creative writing at University of Virginia in Charlottesville and has won all kinds of awards like the National Magazine Award, the Nelson Algren Award, has a literature fellowship from the National Endowment of the Arts, nominated 5 times for the Pushcart Prize, and has made 5 appearances in the Best American Series. And today we have Kevin on to talk about his new book, Only Son, which came out right at the tail end of last year, right? 2025, on McSweeney's, which is huge for us. We love McSweeney's around here. So Kevin, when your publicist reached out to us, it was kind of a no-brainer to be like, oh yeah, send that to us, please. I read it and was enamored by this book. Just completely, utterly fell in love with it. Was so taken with it. So we're very excited to get to have you on today on Concavity Show. Thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about maybe the origin story of Only Son here. We get the sense, that maybe there's some kind of auto-fictional elements going on here. Maybe there's some of your own life in this book. I know Jonathan Lethem did a review of it. He was a recent guest on the show too, so we got lots of connection points there. Walk us through a little bit about what's kind of have you done kind of an auto fiction before, or like a memoirish type thing, or is this kind of a first outing in that genre?
It's very much a first outing, and it wasn't. I didn't set out to write anything autobiographical. I really, during the pandemic, pretty much stopped writing, like a lot of people did, and was really at a standstill for months. And after a while, I just started to give myself little daily writing assignments. I just wanted to finish something every day, and it didn't matter what it was. Could have been a paragraph, a sentence. It was essentially a story a day assignment. And I think by virtue of starting and stopping, by virtue of writing from this strange time when time itself seemed to dilate and stretch out, and everything. I was sort of reassessing what I even wanted to write about. These pieces started to gather, and they were, by virtue of that, pretty autobiographical. It was just kind of what I was thinking about in a given day. And so I just collected them. They were fragments. They were, I after a while I had this idea that I was going to publish them as, 120 single stories. And that's what I sent them out as, really. I saw them as stories, related but unrelated, and self-contained. And McSweeney's, that's the book that McSweeney's agreed to publish. And when I started to really bear down and edit it and look at it as a whole with my editor, Eli Horowitz, who came out of retirement to work on this book.
Oh, did he? No.
Yeah. So we've worked together on lots of on stories, on this narrative app, but also on this. we started to conceive it as possibly a novel, not unrelated stories, but as a kind of unified, somewhat autobiographical memoir-like piece of writing. And so that once they took it, I really just kind of scrapped what I had and rewrote it as a more conventional, more standalone book with these 3 distinct sections, all of which are fairly autobiographical.
Yeah. So the 3 sections of the book are really a meditation on like what is it like to be a son and to lose a father? What is it like to be a young father yourself, and also to kind of be sandwiched between the memory of your own father and reflecting on your own experience as a father? And then kind of the tail end and the third part is you with like, a kid who's off to college basically. And you do one kind of like big final road trip, hurrah, revisiting your own father's trip that he did through a diary.
Or the narrator's father.
The narrator's father.
The narrator's
yes,
father.
That's what I meant to say. Yeah, the narrator's father, of course. And this book is like, I was skimming through it today and I was just writing down kind of the themes that I noticed throughout the book. And we've got things like, the rules are different in Florida is one of the lines in this book, and that is actually like also a theme of this book, I would say too. So the narrator's growing up in Florida. There's kind of like a nuclear fear that haunts the edges of this novel, Reaganism. We've got like a whole lot of senseless tragedy and violence and sexual exposure on Greyhound buses. Skateboarding is a big theme of this book. I want to talk more about that because I grew up as a pretty hardcore skateboarder myself. So I loved all the skateboarding stuff in this book so much. We get things like satanic panic in the 80s, religious conservatism, like fear of serial killers, the Challenger explosion. There's a lot of like revenge and kind of exploitation. A lot of like theology haunts this book as well. And we've got all kinds of things about, really sweet reflections on parenthood and fatherhood. So it's a small book, but it's in a lot of ways, it's like incredibly dense when you're unpacking all that different stuff. How did you try to make this like drum tight book about so many sprawling things, Kevin? You really packed it in a way that's really wonderful.
Thanks. That rundown, I feel like you've just sold so many books with that rundown. That's the most amazing catalog of what's in the book, and it's all in the book too. It's all true.
It's all there.
When I was sending out the book for blurbs, Chris Batchelder, who blurbed it, we exchanged a few emails afterward, and he said something about this book that he knew it took me a long time to write, him reading in an afternoon. He said like the writer's life, it cooks down like spinach. All this like lived experience, and also all of the the collecting and the working and the writing and the distilling. I think that is apparent in the book, and it's the only way I could have written this book. I don't think I could have written this book linearly. I don't think I could have written it if I was just writing for the next word, for the next word, for the next sentence. I think that it was a series of collecting these kinds of random these random stories, but also I think the way you were describing it is very much a product of it being set in Florida at a certain time. In Florida's history. There is that line in there from a billboard that I remember really viscerally as a kid. Florida, the rules are different here. That was Florida's slogan for the longest time, and it's Florida had. This is in the 80s, before Florida was, a meme or a joke. And it was, Florida had this kind of knowing quality to it, that it was this place where this is sort of one of the last frontiers. And I think growing up there and trying to capture that in this sort of fictional rendition of it, all of those, this sort of satanic panic, the Greyhound buses, just the absurdity of that time and place, or definitely came to bear in the book.
I really like the fragmentary nature of it, and as you're talking here, it makes me think about the difference between maybe writing or publishing short stories versus novels. And I recently heard another writer. A lot of writers write novels and stories. And the statement was something like novels are a little more forgiving and thus easier in a way, whereas like writing a short story, it really does have like less room for error. I wondered if that was your experience between, do you consider yourself mainly a story writer or a novelist? And, you know, what is the difference to you between doing long form, short form?
I don't know that I consider myself strictly one or the other because
Or just a writer.
I'm just a writer, man. I've heard novelists say that it's a forgiving form, and talking about how unforgiving the story form is, how difficult it is. I've heard novelists say the short story form is the most difficult form there is, and that's not my experience at all. I just don't. I see the story as a really for me, it's very intuitive. The aperture, the sort of opening that you get on the world that you're looking into, that you're setting out to create. With a novel, maybe because it is so forgiving, I find myself at any given time pulled in dozens of different directions. I mean, with this book, a lot of the work was selectivity, figuring out which of the fragments belonged, which were just there because they were, because they were something that I wrote on a given day, and that's where Eli Horowitz was tremendously helpful. But structuring for me was the most difficult element of this book, and it's funny because the structure I settled on was a 3-part structure, the most paint by numbers structure there is. But it took me 6 years to realize, okay, we've got these sections that I keep writing towards my childhood, the narrator's son's childhood, and something beyond that, and what came next, what came third was the open question, as I was working on it, what I was writing toward. But I think for me, as far as the two different forms, the story form is always going to feel much more intuitive, and it might be because that's what I cut my teeth on when I was first reading. The writers I loved, O'Connor, Barry Hannah, Joy Williams, those are the forms that just really excited me. And so that early exposure, I think, is just, there's something that's just been planted that just won't go away.
It's also a very writerly book, and I mean that as a compliment. And you can maybe tell that you're a teacher, or there's some teacher-like sentiments in here about writing fiction. And, there's a couple of lines that I really loved. One was about, that I think about a lot now, is about that line about fiction's about what should happen, not about what did happen. And, as you're talking here about like lightly Ramona Clef, right? Like you lightly fictionalize things. I think this is actually very common in fiction writing when it comes to looking for, material that rings true. How true is that for you, of saying, I'm going to take this, write what I know, this is, directly from life, but I'm also going to fictionalize it. Like, what does that fictionalizing look like for you? And does it have anything to do with that line about fiction's about what should happen?
It's a great question. I mean, I had very early on, and this is actually an instance in the book, this is sort of lightly fictionalized, but I had my first stories were true stories. They were sort of thinly disguised, and early writing teacher really burned that out of me. It was like barely resuscitated autobiography, right. was what it was, which was I think that was a little bit too refined a sentiment for a state college undergrad in Florida in the 1990s. But I definitely took that and ran with it. And I've since always been a little suspicious of writing from real life. I mean, and this is something we maybe come back to in talking about, writing about skateboarding, something that I did and something that consumed me, for 10 years, but I was always hesitant to make anything of it in fiction, to really use that experience. And so I think that for some reason I've always been suspicious, and if I did write about I did write autobiographically. I always had to look for some inversion. So one of my short stories is about a relationship between a father and a son. The son's a writer, father's also a writer, sending out stories under the son's name and publishing them. This is a kind of sort of a loosely autobiographical story about a writer, but I could not make the narrator a sort of a dream version of myself. I had to make the narrator kind of insidious, at the same time. And I think in this book, I was very reluctant to make the narrative voice a posture for the sort of most refined, most idealized version of myself. Sort of waxing poetic and thinking philosophically at a remove from the events. I had to get my hands dirty. I love the Orwell line. Autobiography isn't to be trusted until it contains something shameful. I think there is. If there's no shame, I don't think there's much truth in memoir or in autofiction or whatever you want to call it.
And there's another great line in there about stories make their own logic, and to your point about especially younger writers maybe either are super imaginative where you're basically in science fiction, or it's like exactly from real life and you just change the names, right? And so I think when you were writing this, did you have something in mind that was also like maybe some other books or works that was sort of inspirational to you, or you liked their own logic of other works?
Well, that line is borrowed from a Lucia Berlin quote, and she's somebody who immediately comes to mind, who wrote somewhat autobiographically. I actually don't know.
Very familiar with her.
Yeah,
she died in Colorado in 1994, and I mean I know because I was there, and not when she died, but I mean I was in Colorado at the time and studied with a lot of the same people at the University of Colorado that she had studied or had worked with there. And so seeing her renaissance after being published by Black Sparrow Press has been truly, truly amazing. If people haven't read Lucia Berlin, like go read her stuff. Like,
cool.
Manual for Cleaning Women alone is like gin priceless.
It's great. After that I bought that book when it came out, and then followed up with it was Black Sparrow publisher originally, yeah. And so I found all of the books that the anthology was collected from, and she's got tons of great uncollected stories in there too. And she writes, I think, pretty clearly from experience, but there's something that's altered about it. There's something that's left out, or there's something the way in which she artfully transposes it onto the form. I think you're never wondering, did this happen? Did this happen? I don't think it's relying on the autobiographical elements to gain power. The stories are powerful in and of themselves. So she's definitely a model. Thinking about somebody like Hervé Guibert's To the Friend Who Did Not Save My Life. Just the I don't think. I didn't write my book with his book as a model, but just as far as directness and as far as a surprising sentiment and a really just kind of an allergy to sentimentality or to conventional sentimentality. I think he's incredible.
Cool. Speaking of writers, there's lots of writers get name dropped in this book, and like Matt said, there's like a lot of kind of meditations on teaching as a creative writing teacher in this book as well. Let's start with the Infinite Jest reference on page 201. We were talking about Wallace before we hit record here. This is a great part where the narrator is with their son in San Francisco on kind of this Mecca trip, tracing the grandfather's road trip that he did, and also looking at all the famous skate spots in SF, like the Embarcadero and things like that. That lit me up for sure. But here's the quote. We go to City Lights. He snaps a picture of himself pretending to read Infinite Jest and sends it to his mother. It saddens me irrationally. Tell us more about the sadness.
That was a great line.
It's so good.
I will fully admit when things are autobiographical. I'm married to a writer. And our son is the son of two writers, and I think that's both in some ways a source of pride for him, but also a source of horror. He grew up around books, and I think for him and just growing up around books and seeing them on the shelves, that book and also the instructions by Adam Levin were two just giant tomes for him. And the idea that somebody would sit down and read these two books, he would sometimes use that book as a kind of prop, like this is the biggest book that I could ever read, And so that I think the Infinite Jest was a nod to that, but also the sad expectations of writer parents for their kids to be these little bookworms. When I don't know a lot of maybe some, but it's not like writers are always begat from other writers. My mom wasn't really a reader, and I was. I don't think necessarily that those things are generational. So I think the pressure to read for him sometimes resulted in theatrical reading of big books he had no intention of reading.
Yeah, just ironically making fun of the books your parents like, kind of a thing.
That's right. That's right.
Totally.
And on the theme of the fathers and sons stuff, I'm a sucker for all of this, and it's sort of like an endless well of possibilities when you're writing about it, because I think in your book there's not only the generation of you and your father, you and being a father. The situation starts out with the father is really like a ghost, and is really not present in most of the book, except in some really cryptic entries into a journal. And I wanted to ask you just about that identity. Like, I'm assuming now you see yourself mostly as a father rather than a son. Would you say that's right?
I'd say that's true.
And that theme of fathers and sons, there was one thing I liked about the identity of like, how do you become a father, that I liked about how there's a comment in the book about, it's just like what you see on TV. Like, here's the dad doing what, like, how do you learn how to be a dad? And it's like, well, we watched just massive amounts of TV where you would see the father, come in after work, reading the newspaper in the morning, watching TV, mowing the yard, like
drinking
father knows best. Yeah. Right. And so I wonder if do you think that is unique to sort of this generation? Like, I don't know that my father or grandfather or even kids, they don't even watch TV. They watch YouTube. Like, how do we get that without TVs? Kind of what I'm getting at.
I mean, I guess ideally you get it from your own parents, and then if you don't have them as models, is that what you're asking? Are you asking?
Yeah, because there's like the ghostly father here. You can't really see what he did. You're flying blind, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, I think part of it, and I think part of the the mythology of the dad in the book is you get it mostly secondhand. The when somebody dies, they're especially young, they're often sainted, and they still all get messages from people who knew him, and they're always incredibly vague. The idea that there would be this journal, this firsthand account from the father, which there is in the book, was it would be like a magic book, to me, this kind of direct firsthand writing from the man himself, whereas when somebody dies, often it's just secondhand accounts, from parents, from other relatives. He was a great man, he would have, too bad he isn't around still. So I think that those models, best to get them from TV.
Well, and there's a sense of desperation, as you're saying here, of like, just give me anything about like, what was this person really like? And the narrator's 9 years old at the beginning of the story, and there's these sort of fragments of a life left behind, and he's trying to make sense of, what is the, what do I do with this? What does this mean? And I think that's even universal, even if your father is still living, or or you're trying to understand anyone who's dead. Of like, what was this person really like? I think it's really hard to get that. And so, how did you decide to sort of, I don't know, frame that in fiction or show it and they'll tell it rather than just, there's those objects at the beginning, maybe the things that he was, the fragments of his life.
Mm-hmm. Well, so two things. First, writing about an absent father is something I've been doing, I think, since I started writing. I think the first stories I wrote had at least that in the background. So it's something that I've continued to come back to again and again and again as a writer. And so it's something I've had at least some practice thinking about and doing and trying to evoke an absence through a few details. But in this book itself, I think I had to really confront it directly, to write about it in a way that was a little bit more, a little bit less oblique, maybe a little bit more earnestly than I would have been comfortable with if I set out to to do that in the first place. And so I think it was a lot of starting, a lot of stopping, but ultimately it was about writing about it maybe from a bit more of a memoiristic stance.
Well, and the tone of it is also sort of, like you said, direct earlier, or it's very focused in. It doesn't really wander around from section to section. Like, how did you decide to sort of stay in that voice?
Well, that was helped, I think. You mean in the first section or in the...
Yeah, especially in the first section, but I actually found the voice pretty consistent throughout.
Yeah, I think that was from taking all of what I had written before and just rewriting it and treating it as, treating the material as a kind of preparation for this book I was rewriting over the course of a year, because the voices in the fragmented stories were wildly different. I mean, it was just like, some of it was like bad stand-up, some of it was just like cast off, paragraphs from old stories. I mean, it was really just a total hodgepodge, and it was trying to find a kind of, my writing, in my stories often reads like writing, and it's, I work over the sentences. I write very slowly. I don't revise much. And with this book, I wanted it to be a little bit more declarative, a little bit more limpid, I guess. And it's not like I got rid of writing that sounded like writing, but I wanted to write a little bit more directly.
Yeah, I think that definitely comes through, and with the themes that you're talking about, is ultimately, there's a lot of dry humor in the book, but it's ultimately very, very sad. And there's a lot, which again, I'm meaning as a compliment, because I don't think a happy father-son relationship makes for a very good book. It's
good.
So Springsteen has a line of like, "Born to Stay, who would have bought that shit?" Like, it's like, you got to run away, man. It's like, born to run away. You got to.
There's no story there.
You got to disappear. No one would buy that.
That's funny.
But the beginning, the middle, and the end, I really like the way that you, as you mentioned, the structure you came to during the process of this. But talk a little bit about like what you were most into maybe during that pandemic area that survived a lot of rewriting. It sounds like you did a lot of rewriting, but like, are there big parts of it that didn't need as much?
A lot of the writing about the son, because I was thinking, during the pandemic, our son wasn't in school, he was at home, and he was taking Zoom classes in his room. And I was just, thinking about my own childhood a whole lot more in light of his. And so a lot of, and also thinking about his childhood. So he was in 10th grade when the pandemic happened. And I was thinking about, this sort of kaleidoscopic, connection between, the childhood he was experiencing then versus 5 years earlier, but also my own. And so a lot of the remembering of his childhood was pretty much so that would be in the second section, the section that takes place in suburban Southern California. That section was probably, when I rewrote it, reworked it, a lot of that remained as is. But I was never happy with that section on its own when the son was 10, 11 years old, because it was a lot of very dear, precious father-son moments. It had a kind of Wonder Years glow to it. And so I think one of the reasons why the book took so long to write was because that third section, figuring out, the son getting older, the son leaving, thinking of those years that, so the first section, it's when the narrator's 9, 10 years old. Second section's when his son is 9, 10, 11 years old. The third section is the sort of the unknown. And I think finding something that kind of undercut the sentiment in the section. The second section was really important. I think nothing undercuts sentiment and nostalgia more than a teenage boy in a car on a road trip. And so I think that's part of that was worked as ballast, for some of the gauzier bits in the second part.
Well, and I'd asked you earlier about like how to be a parent without a model, and in that third section, some of that really does come to bear. Where there's a moment that stands out to me where they're in the hotel. The narrator's had a couple of drinks. Son kind of smells like weed, and there's this moment of like, man, do you say anything? Like, how permissive of a parent am I really? How much of a dick am I going to be about this?
Yeah.
Or like, like, again, with no real model of like, what would my parents have done, and either accept or reject that, just being like, what is the right thing to do, or what is the right way to sort of navigate these little moments in relationships which do add up. So I'm curious if there, you put those moments in there to sort of illustrate that.
Yeah, that's it's not something I see a lot in fiction. These questions of parenthood, not the verities, but the questions of do I make a joke of this? Do I react to this as the composite parent would react, or do I just sort of pretend like it didn't happen? I was feral as a kid. I was left to roam. I could go where I wanted. I could come home when I wanted. There was not much accountability. And I think, as a parent, I'm constantly remembering that and thinking of it not as a model, but as a contrast to how my friends, how I, have been taught to parent. So it's definitely something I think about and don't have an answer to.
Well, and kids, hate hypocrisy. Like, oh, you did this when you were a kid or whatever. And
oh
it's
my gosh.
And it's probably much worse.
Yes. I have advice to all you parents out there. Do not ever have an honest conversation with your kids about the drugs you've done when you were a kid. It'll always come back to bite you. It will always be requoted. Don't ever. There's no time in which that is germane or necessary.
Not even when they're like 25 or 30.
No, maybe
post 40.
Post 40, maybe, but definitely not before that.
That's a good note. There's some really funny stuff in part 1 of this book about the narrator, some of his like choices and actions and behavior, and one that really jumped out at me as hilarious. Speaking of Chekhov is mentioned in your book as like having said that repeated detail accumulates meaning. And then there's this part where the narrator is going through his mom's closet digging for something and finds a mauve-colored dildo. And then it's like the punishment for digging through your mom's closet is something like this. Like that's the punishment in and of itself. And then later is mad at mom for some reason, and then takes the dildo, sticks it in the foyer, listens to the mom and the boyfriend walk in, and there's like a pregnant pause. So just like this book is like an absolute study in repeated detail accumulates meaning. There's so many like little anecdotes, and they build towards this really kind of ultimate, like, patchwork quilt type thing in the end. You also mentioned Vonnegut as someone who's informs how you teach the writing, or the narrator teaches their students. Make awful things happen to your characters. Seems like that's true for this book as well, right? Like, there's a lot of misery, there's a lot of unjust stuff that occurs to these characters, particularly like in the first part, I would say, before we get into the more meditative thinking on being a parent yourself. Yeah. What is that Chekhov quote? How does that feel to you, hearing it back when you think about Only Son?
About detail?
Was that a goal for you, sort of like, I'm going to take this as like a challenge?
No, I don't necessarily think it was a goal, but it's definitely, I think, with a book that is so fragmented, I think having some kind of linking material in a detail as unbecoming as a dildo is I think important.
Your mom's dildo.
I think with a fragmented book, it's easy for it to just sort of feel like a random assortment of fortunes or epigrams or something like that. And I think part of that is a kind of threading together of the sections. But I mean, I think this comes back to my comfort and background as a story writer. I think that great Nabokov line, fondle detail, like just really, I mean, it's said in the, inimitably creepy way that,
by Nabokov too.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that, with a story, the detail is often what's transacted. I'm thinking about that car in Joy Williams' story Rot, that the husband takes apart and reassembles inside the house, or the wooden leg in Good Country People by Flannery O'Connor that comes off at the end. There's often the surprise or the epiphany comes not through something a character realizes, but through a way in which a detail is transformed. And so I've always been really hyper attuned to that in the stories I read, and so I think that definitely is part of what comes out in the writing itself.
Yeah.
In the book.
Yeah, nice. So you got, instead of Chekhov's gun here, you've got Chekhov's dildo.
Chekhov's dildo.
Moffett's
That's
dildo.
right. That's right.
It's a new literary term. That's great. There's a line in the book that I think about all the time now. Hiking is just walking uphill. Page 128. Yeah. That line lives rent free in my brain now, Kevin. Thanks for that. Speaking of all these kind of like small little like epithets, these small little details. There's all these beautiful moments about about parenthood as well, and what it's like to be a parent. And another one that stood out to me is the number of words it takes to raise a child is absurd. On page 99.
Yes.
That really got me thinking. Like, I got 2 kids. They're 9 and almost 5. Matt's got 2 kids. They're well in their teens now. How many tens of thousands, millions of words does it take to raise a child? That's a great thought. I love that.
Does taper off. I mean, your kids
Sure.
are maybe a little older than my oldest is 19 now, and he's off at college. I rarely see him, and so the words feel like they almost have more meaning now. And the other thing I was thinking about during this is like, there's a moment later in the book where the father is remembering the childhood, being a young father with growing children, and says something like, even the hardest days weren't that bad. And I think there's something to that of like trying to remember back of, we were busy, we had a lot going on, our lives were complicated, but there was a lot of good times too. And the amount of words that you use then, it feels like not many carry that much weight, and then you have these little moments. And so this is, would you say this is a lot of the book is about like memory?
Yeah.
And those
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think what you just said, rings true for me. My son is 22 and getting ready to finish college, and the hunger for more words. As a parent, those when words aren't cheap, anymore. The thinking about the explanations and the questions and the conversations and not with any impatience, but with a sense of like this is part of getting them ready to leave. But yeah, now there is a kind of pithiness to because often the conversations are on the phone or they're under duress or they're definitely not in you don't have those gaping hours of time. And so I think a lot of it is nostalgizing that and thinking about that as a in light of the present day. Absolutely. I think it's I think most this isn't a memoir but it's I think most memoirs are definitely deeply rooted in memory.
And there was one little section that's almost like a Joe Brainerd, like I remember type stuff of just, I remember this, or remember that. And like Dave said earlier, that sort of accumulation of details, it really does. That's the point of Brainerd's exercise, I think, is that it builds up a picture in your mind, even though it's just super repetitive. And so I think for readers who like the Joe Brainerd style, as well as anything super fragmentary, they will love this book. And it wasn't apparent to me when I picked it up that was the case. It was only into reading it for a bit, I was like, oh, this is actually... Some of it also reminded me of like Mr. and Mrs. Bridge books. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
No, what's that?
You get a sort of Evan S. Connell, where you get a picture of like just very short paragraphs, and they're usually just in domestic scene, and then you move on to the next one, and it's sort of like, where does time jump, and there was a lot of like, I don't know, with the fragmentary, like our time jumping around, which makes sense, I think. I actually had a question for you, changing gears a little bit more about being a teacher, and since you teach, I'm curious what it's like after you publish something and you're like, oh shit, my students are going to read this. Like, or do you assume your students are not going to read anything that you write? Like, I don't know. Like, what's that like?
That's a good question. And this, the lightly fictionalized college where I taught, I don't teach there anymore. And these are, very clearly not the students I'm teaching now. But I think part of it is the kind of, thinking of whether the humor is self-implicating or whether it is, if there's a barb to it. I would never write anything, autobiographical or about my students that actually happened or that was true. So many of these are kind of nods to composite scenarios. Like I did used to quote Vonnegut. I did used to say, make terrible things happen to your characters. Yeah. And my students did take that as a challenge and made the worst possible things happen to their characters, including, like Ebola and, just anything that they could use to, bring their characters to their deaths. They did that. Yeah. So, but I think that, I don't think my students would recognize themselves in anything that's...
I guess I meant more like as a teacher, you're saying, here's some ways to write fiction. And now it's like, are the tables turned a bit and that they can go and read your work and to see, did you do what you said you were going to do? Yeah. Or do you break your own rules and you worry like, oh shit, even though I did this, I wouldn't recommend anyone else do it? Or like, what is that like?
Yeah. I mean, I have long abandoned rules as a teacher, as far as like hard and fast. I mean, definitely there are some tendencies I try to instill in students, and the ones that I think were instilled in me, basically looking for pressure, finding volatility, kind of looking for it in language, looking for it in the interactions between characters. But the Vonnegut's 8 rules for writing fiction, or some of the quotes from the book are definitely written with a bit of a little bit of tongue in cheek. It's kind of not completely earnest, and definitely doesn't resemble how I actually teach.
There's a great exchange on page 126 in the narrator's classroom. Mike Adelia, an elderly student who rarely speaks, chimes in. Stories make their own logic, he says, for the writer and the reader both. Well put, Mike, I tell him. I'm just quoting you, brother, he says. It's the only thing I've written down all semester.
There you go.
It's a great line to actually, that made me think of like the teacher is like father figure, right? Like an authority figure in a way. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like, you will be surprised at like what your kids remember or pick up on. And it's like, that's the only thing I remember. It's like, my dad told me like, don't buy a used car on the end of the month, or, something like totally random, that it's like, that's what you picked up on. But there's a question for you kind of about advice. We mentioned there's a lot of like writerly advice like that. But I find advice to be very tricky, and that usually it's a flattering thing to be asked to give advice to someone, but actually I almost never take anyone's advice. Like, it's very rare. It's like I'm very skeptical of anyone giving advice, and it seems like I actually don't like being asked for advice unless it's like, should you turn left here or go to that restaurant? Like, life advice just seems a really fucking hard thing to do, but you do have to do it as a parent, and you have to probably do it as a teacher, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was very receptive to advice when I was an undergrad. I had an incredibly formative professor at University of Florida named Paget Powell, who was he was a guru and a mystery, and definitely a father figure for a lot of fatherless or fatherless boys and boys with father issues. And so he said a lot of things that I still remember. And remember well, but I was just very receptive to that, then, and I hear you. After a while, you have to, kind of turn on the, or put on the blinders and not be so receptive to advice. But I think there is a time for a lot of writers when you're hungry for something, and he on one of my earliest stories, he and I think it was probably a loosely autobiographical story. It was probably really boring, like a guy like mowing a lawn, and then he finishes and then the story's over. But he turned the story over, and he wrote, "Here's what you got to do," and he wrote on the back of the story, "Make up some good shit." That was his advice. And at the time, it blew my mind. It was the most straightforward advice, but the fact that he took the time to turn that story over and write it in his very very faint pencil, I was blown away by that.
Did he take you fishing?
I watched him fish. He had a sinkhole in his yard for a long time that filled with water, and then he filled that sinkhole with catfish, and I watched him fish, and I think I tried to skin a catfish, but it was unsuccessful.
One of our good buddies,
Rob
Short went to University of Florida and was mentored, I would say, by Paget Powell, and has a lot of good fishing stories with him.
I was just gonna ask Matt, did Rob Short have him as a prop? I feel like he did. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. But I was also interested in Harry Crews stuff. I'm a big Harry Crews fan, and Harry Crews is, talk about imaginative and crazy. There's a line from the writer Benjamin Percy. It has the title of a book on craft called "Thrill Me," and to your thing of like, make up some good shit, it's Benjamin Percy's line is like, "Thrill me," which seems like a really high bar. Like, I don't know that my life is thrilling enough that I've like, and it's like, well, you don't have to have seen it or lived it. Make it up is his point. And so I think, there's someone like Harry Crews, or Bukowski is mentioned on that same page as Infinite Jest and Black Sparrow, John Fontaine stuff. It's like people who actually lived some crazy shit and, on the road. But then there's other people who was like, no, it's Springsteen has this line of like, it's all made up, man. That's how good I am. I made it up. I invented that. There's something to that. So I really like that as advice to other storytellers. It's like, just fucking make it up.
Yeah. Dennis Johnson had something to that effect on his printer. He had a little note to himself, and I'm gonna forget what scene it is, but there's a scene in The Godfather where somebody is being kind of choked out on the floor of a bar while a cop is walking by, and he notes that scene, and he's like every scene should be like that, something just like magical should happen, something just absolutely unforgettable should happen in every scene. And so
super high stakes and tragic in a way. And you're going back to my question about your students reading your work is really kind of a question about audience and who are you writing for. I think you mentioned Nabokov has a line about how the writer should only write for the person he sees in his shaving mirror every morning. And he was famously like, I don't write for anyone. He was like, fuck everyone except my own sensibilities. And I don't know if that's quite extreme, but like at some point you've had a lot of success as a writer. Other people are going to read this. Reviewers are going to read it. Your editor is going to read it. Your wife is going to read it. Like, what does that do to your writing process, or are you able to really shut that out?
I think on any given day I'm able to shut it out, and I'm just thinking about the schema of what I'm working on. But there is a time when you start thinking about who's reading it. My wife is a writer as well. And so I think about her as a first reader, and I not that I'm writing for her, but I definitely know that she's going to read it. When I was working on this book, after McSweeney's had taken it, I was thinking about Eli as an editor, and his sort of editorial suggestions as I was writing it. But I think if you start to think about more than one or two people or three people, then it can become kind of a mind game, and so I don't try to like come up with like a composite version of like the ideal reader, but definitely I try to think of it at least as a communication between me and another person. I think that the Nabokov line sounds very Nabokov, and I think the better answer would be I write for the person Nabokov sees in the shaving mirror every morning. I write for that
him.
guy,
You're
that
for a
dude.
dead
Yeah,
Russian.
all the dead Russians.
Well, I also think what you were saying there about being even aware, especially if something is a little more personal to you, then it's sort of like giving a gift to someone. And I think of the Lewis Hyde stuff about how that you've been given this gift to be a storyteller in our society. Like you could have been born a truck driver or a railroad engineer or whatever, and it's like, well, your role is storyteller and teacher, and like what a gift you have, and then to be able to share it with other people. So I thought that was really beautiful, and thank you for what you've written. I should have asked you this at the very beginning, and now we're 52 minutes into recording. Would you like to read a little section of it?
I was about to ask this
sure.
too. I had the same exact thought, Matt. Oh, it's maybe late in the game, but anytime. I think
it would give people a good taste of, like, say, you've read a little bit, but not enough.
Not enough.
What are you thinking? Like just like a page or two?
I love the part about the narrator playing with Star Wars figurines as a child on page
like 2 minutes.
19. That's a great section.
I can read that.
Not 10 minutes, like 2 minutes.
Okay. I'll read that section and the one right after it.
Great.
The wildfires come late that summer. Miles north of us, the pine woods burn for weeks, clotting the coast of Florida with resinous smoke. We're told to remain indoors. We do as we're told. Outside the windows, pine ash falls and falls, and I play with Star Wars action figurines. I'm not allowed to see the movies. I scare too easily. I invent my own story about heroic Darth Vader and his war against the stars. His helmet gives him a sad look, triangle mouth, dead black eyes. I imagine the war is going poorly. A friend tells me that he's the villain and the stormtroopers are his henchmen. I reject it. My Star Wars has no bad guys. The action figures fight side by side against the stars, always overhead but too distant to attack. They curse them from my bedroom carpet. Finally it rains and I'm allowed to go outside again with the other hostile fauna. Friends and I hunt snakes in the palmetto scrub around our townhouse. I come home one night covered in chigger bites, and my mother brushes clear nail polish over the welts. I lie shirtless and miserable as the chiggers suffocate in their hidey holes. My body is a decoy, a trap made of meat. I scratch off the scabs of dried polish one by one. I watch the retired bail bondsman next door decapitate a cottonmouth with a shovel. The snake's severed head keeps snapping while its headless body slithers away, and the retired bail bondsman grins and gestures with a shovel as if he's orchestrated this educational display just for me.
That's great. The part about the war against the stars reminds me a lot of have you ever read Salvador Plasencia's book The People of Paper? They war against Saturn.
That's right. Absolutely. Sal's a friend. I love that book.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to his next project. I hear there's something maybe in the works.
There's been that.
I'm very eagerly anticipating that. We'll try and get him on the show when he does.
You should.
And Dave, you should ask your skateboarding question before we
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Like the part about the narrator teaching his son how to skateboard is very apt to my life right now. Mm-hmm. Both my kids have semi-recently received skateboards as gifts, taken them to the skate park, and all that stuff. I used to teach skateboard camps in summers to like 6 to 15-year-olds. So I just got to skate all day and teach kids how to skateboard.
That's great.
So anytime I come across skateboarding in fiction, I get all kinds of high octane dopamine hits. And there's lots of great skateboarding stuff in this book. The part about the line the son does, where he like kick flips up the gap, and then like nose manuals the pad, and then like just the line of tricks, and the kind of like secret language that you get to learn as a skateboarder, like going into a skateboard shop. You're like, do you want Venture or independent trucks, Spitfire wheels, or Jessup grip tape, or the kind of like the entire new nomenclature? You capture that really well in the book. I love that, and I just felt like very true to my experience.
That's great. That means a lot. I was more aware of those sections of wanting to get it right, and of wanting not to want it to not sentimentalize or like over dramatize it as an act, this act of rebellion, or this whatever it is. But I appreciate that. I remember growing up, all the skateboarders' names having such magical power, because there's like they're like the Bones Brigade, you have like Lance Mountain, Tony Hawk, Steve Caballero, like all these names are just like Natus, out of this
Coppice,
they're just, where do they come from? They're just from, out of this world, these amazing names. And so before, when the magazine was the only thing there was, this sort of gateway to California and a few other places, it did have this kind of power, like just staring at a picture, trying to figure out how the person got up on what he's up on, and what happened afterward, trying to sort of suss that out. It was a huge part of my childhood too, and my son's childhood as well. And this part of this is in the book, but I didn't necessarily push him into skateboarding. He was super into soccer, for years and years, and he just kind of by virtue of being in Southern California and by I had a skateboard around the house, all the time, and he just kind of happened into it, and really got super into it in high school, which was really fun to go and go to on his birthday parties and other occasions, go from skate park to skate park with him.
That's great. I love how you capture the sense of like at a certain point in the teenager's life, he no longer really wants his dad to be at the skate park with him anymore, even though his dad's a skater. And I was like, oh damn, that's some cold shit. Like, that's coming for me.
I think his friends liked having me around, but he didn't. He didn't. They didn't want me, talking about like old tricks and like old, the Plan B videos and stuff like that. They were just not at all. He wasn't at all enamored of that. He wanted his own fun. So I get it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Plenty of skateboarding, and one of our previous guests, Kyle Beachy, wrote a book, The Most Fun Thing. And then, of course, Brett Anthony Johnston, famous big skater. So
absolutely.
Lots more to talk about there. I kind of have a random question for you that is unrelated to everything we've mentioned so far, but I collect these stories of anyone who went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and they call you on the phone when you get in, right? Well, Did you get a phone call from someone?
I didn't get a phone call. I got a letter. I didn't. They didn't lay out the red carpet for me at all. I got in other places, and I was a slightly older than the usual Iowa Workshop student, but I got into a couple other places. They called me. They wooed me. They told me why I should go there, and then Iowa sent me a letter in the mail, and I called them and said, you sent me a letter. Yeah, well, first of all, is this real? But also, like, am I gonna get financial aid? Like, am I gonna be able to teach? What? And they weren't able to tell me what that looked like, and I still ended up going. It was the shadow of that place had enough. I don't know. It still had enough pull that I ended up going there anyway. So no phone call from Frank Conroy. No wooing. Just a straight up U.S. mail letter.
It's fascinating. I mean, David Foster Wallace got in and did not get funding and did not go. That's why he went to University of Arizona. Right. A little more like you're saying of wooing. Would you get to teach? Would you get funding? Would you get X, Y, or Z? But you had applied only as fiction. I've also heard other people who applied, maybe I'll do fiction and poetry and see if I get into both, which sounds crazy to me.
Yeah.
There
was somebody there in both. Steve Grant was doing both poetry and fiction.
He was our last guest.
Oh,
that's amazing.
Yeah, I do know Steve. Yeah,
cool.
And I was like, this is a great story, Steve, but there's a bunch of other crazy stories of people who went to Iowa. That's why I just sort of ask everyone of like, what was that like of because I've heard that they do call people, and you did get calls from other programs. So, but no regrets. No regrets.
No regrets. I had a great experience there. I met a lot of great people. Elizabeth McCracken was a visitor there. She wasn't. She was just teaching there for the semester. She was a wonderful teacher, incredible human, and she really made my experience there worthwhile. James L. McPherson was also a mentor, and he was terrific. But Iowa at the time, Frank Conroy was still the director. It was a really interesting kind of microcosm of the literary world, in that like favors were given out randomly. Like who got what funding didn't really match up with what you saw as like who was the most talented. So it really was in some ways like an introduction into the literary world, where everything sometimes seems kind of randomly dispersed. That's what it felt like there.
Cool. I've got one sort of final question for you about religion, and we haven't talked about the title yet as it pertains to the reference to John 3:16, only son. But we have, like, in part one, the narrator is the only son of his deceased father, and then in the second part, the narrator has a son, and also in the third part. And there's lots of I love the Kentucky grandmother aunt characters in this book, like the deceased father's mom, and the way that they are so religiously conservative and like terrifyingly so, and the narrator goes to visit them on a Greyhound bus and kind of gets grilled about religious stuff, and he's like, well, I think we're Methodists now, and then they're upset, they're not very impressed by that, and he says, or maybe Episcopalian. So the role of religion in this book is it's around what's I guess there's a question here, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. But what made you want to call your book, to have this kind of like the most famous Bible verse on the, as the title, as it pertains to the themes?
So the title, I can't take credit for it. My wife was the one who suggested it, and the alignment with John 3:16, which I think is there's like a bit of it. In the book too, there's that line. That connection wasn't one I had made until way later, and I don't know that she did either. It was just, these are three only sons, the father's father and then the father's son. So the title, I think, has that resonance because of, the only begotten son for sure. Somebody said that's definitely from the is it a Leonard Skinner song too? I think there's maybe a line from that as well, which is probably an allusion to the John 3:16 Bible quote. As far as religion, because it's set in Florida, because it's set in Kentucky, that I think that's an inevitability, I didn't grow up in a particularly religious household, but definitely those orbits were very close, and I think capturing some of that weirdness and guilt, I think was important in the book, for sure. And anecdotally, there's a line in the book about the father's mother, the father who dies, his mother having a second funeral, and that actually did happen, which I didn't find out till just quite recently. My mom told me, that they had a second funeral in their church. They were Southern Baptists, because they wanted. It kind of wasn't official or real until they had it in their church, and we weren't invited to this right. This kind of close to our funeral. But that was so that as a detail, that was something that I thought merited inclusion.
Yeah, this is a bit of a spoiler, but I love the very last paragraph of the entire book where we get a point of view switch, where the mother becomes the speaker. That's a really cool move. I was like, I had to read it a few times. What's happening here? Hold on a second. Oh, the mother's saying this. Okay, that's cool. What sort of informed that ending to the novel?
Well, the mother's voice. I mean, the mother as a secondary character. Yeah. She didn't really enter into the picture until really late in the writing process. I mean, she was definitely a tertiary character. She was somebody who, was involved in the sort of central action of the book. But as I was writing, I started to see her as a story less maybe about a narrator and a missing father, and more about a narrator's relationship with his mother. Yeah. And so I think as that was developed over the course of the book, her voice became pretty central. Like the remember game, a lot of that is her saying, "Do you remember this? Do you remember that?" And I think getting her voice was already a large part of the novel. And I think that last section, it kind of intuitively seemed like something she should see and she should evoke in that way. Yeah. And so I think that was grew out of her just taking on a greater significance as I wrote and rewrote the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great wrap. Cool. Kevin, is there any final thoughts that you have? Anything you wanted to talk about today that we haven't got to yet?
I don't think so.
Left on the table here?
I don't think so. That was really enjoyable and wide spanning. Unless there's anything that you think we should hit on, I don't necessarily have any talking points I want to nail.
Cool.
Where can people find out more about your work?
I don't have a website, so I guess there. Google is the way, and McSweeney's. There's a site for the book on McSweeney's, and
I'll link that in the show notes.
Yeah, and various literary magazines where you can find them. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin.
Really enjoyed your time and getting to talk to you. This book is a real treat. Yeah. Dave and I both just really enjoyed the whole process of getting to go through it slowly and enjoy it. It was really great. Mm-hmm. And we're sort of like, I'm going to compare myself to the New York Review of Books. We go on our own timeline. We don't just do it right when it comes out. This book is going to be around for a very long time, so we take our own time reading it. Thanks to everyone else who is listening. Dave, if they want to email us, what's our email?
Oh yeah, before I do that, I want to give a huge thanks to your publicist, Katie Kurtzman, Kevin, she reached out to us about your book and was like, hey, I think this book would be a great fit for your show. And we get quite a lot of emails like that where it's clearly just like an AI or like a batch email to like, you know, a million literary podcasts, and there's nothing personal about it. But we were like, oh, this book is designed for our show, like 100%. Please, yeah, send it to us. We will read this. Like,
that's great.
You know,
that's great.
And she was lovely to deal with. So I was also really surprised, and I thought it was super cool to see on her a list of other books that she does publicity for. That Stuck by Oliver Jeffers is one of them that she represents, which is a huge book in our house with the kids. Matt, do you know this book? It's about
kids are too old, man.
Kid named Floyd. He gets his kite stuck in a tree. So he starts throwing random shit up into the tree to try and knock the kite out.
I mean, I know Oliver Jeffers, but
yeah.
You know,
and then there's like an increasingly absurd and magically real kind of series of objects that he starts throwing, like a kitchen sink, and then an orangutan, and then a fire brigade, and then like a cruise ship line, like, you know. And then finally he gets a bright idea and he takes a saw and he's like about to saw the tree down, but then he throws the saw and the saw hits the kite out of the tree, and that was it, and it was unstuck. Hilarious, great book. So really cool that Katie's a part of that as well.
You could do a bonus episode with that guy.
Oliver Jeffers.
It's not for our audience.
Or with Floyd the kid from the book. Yeah, people can get in touch with us. We're concavityshow@gmail.com. We're Concavity Show on Instagram. That's about the only social media that we use anymore.
Patreon.com/Concavity Show.
Right. Yes.
I would put that one on there, and all of our episodes are on YouTube, so you can find them there.
Yeah, audio only.
And what else? We'll be back with a new episode soon.
Yeah, and you never know when it will come out. Maybe in 2 or 3 months. Maybe in 6 weeks. Who knows?
Maybe 2 days. We don't have a regular.
Probably not
schedule.
2 days. I'm not going to promise that. But Kevin, thank you so much again for your time today. It's been awesome talking to you, and thanks again for this wonderful book. Really loved it.
Thanks so much. Great questions. I really enjoyed that.
Into darkness.